Hello, I'm Keith Ellison, representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District in Minnesota, and I'm proud to present this week's Congressional Black Caucus message to America. In 2014, voter participation was at its lowest level since World War II, and it's clear why. The Supreme Court's decision to dismantle the Voting Rights Act and dozens of new voter ID laws. We're already seeing people being denied their right to vote in this year's primary season. North Carolina, new law extended same-day voter registration and reduced early voting. Arizona, people made to wait until midnight to vote just because of lack of funding. In Wisconsin, voter ID laws, lack of funding of educating people about the new laws kept thousands from voting. Before the Voting Rights Act was gutted, some of these states would have been forced to have their new voting laws reviewed by the Department of Justice because of their history of discrimination, something called pre-clearance, but not anymore. The decision to throw out Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act combined with the new voter ID laws are barriers to participation for Americans who already don't have a seat at the table. Meanwhile, the wealthy vote in high numbers, and they donate too. Our policies reflect that. Did you know that people who make $150,000 a year vote at like the 80% level? And people who make $50,000 or lower, well, let's just say they vote a whole lot less. This is something called the voting gap, the difference between higher income people and lower income people and their voting participation, just going to the polls and voting. What accounts for the voting gap? Well, if you got 3 jobs making $7.25 an hour, you may not have enough time to get to the polls. Whereas if you have a job that pays a lot, you may have more discretionary time. You may be able to plan your day. You might be able to take time off to actually go vote. And there are also a number of other reasons that explain the voting gap. But the voting gap is real. The best way to create meaningful change is to close the voter gap. And when the voting gap is lower, policies are more equitable. After the Voting Rights Act in 1965, Southern Democrats shifted their behavior to respond to new African American voters. And guess what happens when working Americans vote? In a study of all 50 states, over a 30-year timeline, researchers found that when poor folks and working people voted, inequality went down. Another study found that states with lower voting gap have higher minimum wage, stricter lending laws, and more generous health care benefits than states with high voting gaps between rich and poor. Make no mistake about it, voting still matters for the African American community. And for every American, voting is the quickest way to bring about real change. To do that, we must restore the Voting Rights Act. We must vote, and we have to make voting a whole lot easier, not harder. Thank you very much. This is Keith Ellison, and make sure you are at the polls.